We got into more racy and bombshell text messages, hotel nights, even a video that all further examines the relationship between alleged victim Jane and criminal defendant Sean Diddy Combs. Law&Crime's in-court reporter Elizabeth Millner is back with us about what happened in court today as Jane was once again questioned by Diddy's defense attorney. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Hey everybody, this is a Law&Crime legal alert. If you received Depo-Provera birth control shots and were later diagnosed with a brain or spinal tumor called meningioma, you may be eligible for a lawsuit. That's right, Morgan & Morgan is investigating claims that patients weren't properly warned about this risk. It's free to check, just takes a few minutes, and you don't pay unless they win. So scan the QR code on screen, click the link below, or head over to forthepeople.com/LCDepo to see if you qualify. Alleged victim 2 in the criminal case of Sean Diddy Combs, Jane, back on the stand, back being cross-examined by defense counsel Tenny Garagos. Important day for the defense because after all, Jane, who was testifying using a pseudonym, explained that she was essentially pressured into these hotel nights with Diddy, her lover, for several years. These sexual episodes with other men, sex workers, in front of Diddy for his pleasure. But then on cross-examination, they seem to be trying to suggest this was consensual, that she was a willing participant, that he isn't this nefarious sex trafficker as portrayed by the prosecution, that there was no force, fraud, or coercion. So I want to bring on Law&Crime's in-court reporter Elizabeth Millner, who's been not only in the courtroom today for all of the action, but in the courtroom for every minute of the action, every day. And particularly today with the cross-examination of Jane, it's really interesting. Elizabeth, before we even get into that, there was a lot of chatter, particularly on the lunchtime show that we do on Law&Crime's YouTube, and commentary about this juror. There's apparently some sort of issue with a juror. I know we have limited information, but based on what was said in court, can you elaborate on this?
Yeah, so they gave us little tidbits, little pieces of information, little nuggets here and there, but it seems like from the defense's perspective that they really want to keep this particular juror and they want to make sure that this juror will not be dismissed. Now, as far as why this juror might possibly be dismissed, that is still kind of up in the air. As far as what we've even seen in the transcripts, that portion is redacted or it's sealed. And so the defense was just pretty much saying that they want to be able to respond to what the government responded to in another letter. And so they said pretty much that they being the government, and this is the defense making this argument, that the government just wants to strike another black juror. And then I think the government kind of took a little bit of offense to that. And the government was like, well, okay, looking back at the record, we see kind of a lack of compelling, and then they were kind of going so fast. But as far as just what the judge said, as far as what will happen kind of next, is that we'll deal with this issue before the weekend. And so it's still kind of up in the air as far as even all the jurors being inside the courtroom today, because it was a little bit of a shorter session today. Everyone was in there. I saw all the jurors. So nobody has been dismissed thus far. Nobody's been kicked out just yet or anything like that. But we should know before the week is over what will happen to this juror number 6.
Yeah, I saw reporting that the prosecution says there's a lack of candor, meaning, I don't know, the juror wasn't being honest with something during jury selection. I'm not sure. Hopefully we get more information as the week progresses. But let's now get into Jane's testimony. So it seems to me, and there's a lot to get into here, it seems to me a big theme today was trying to stress that she wasn't objecting to the hotel nights, or that she was somehow setting them up or encouraging them, and also how she communicated with the men, how she communicated with the sex workers. What can you tell us a little bit about this?
Yeah, so it was another day, and again, even though it was a shortened day, it was another day where we were seeing a lot, or not we were seeing a lot of text exhibits, because while Jane is still on the stand, unfortunately, we cannot see the exhibits. They are not shown on the exhibit screen, but we're hearing about all these different exhibits. So sometimes when I say we're seeing, the jury's actually seeing it, but we are hearing about all these different text messages. And so, yes, it seemed like the theme from the defense's cross-examination of Jane today was definitely like, it seemed from their kind of theory of this that Jane was a willing participant, even went as far as to set up these hotel nights, and even went as far as to book these entertainers that she specifically wanted for these various hotel nights. And so just right off the bat, we're seeing text exhibits between Jane and Cabral, one of the entertainers or escorts that they use, from December 20th of 2021. So still kind of early-ish into the relationship between Sean Combs and Jane. And so These text messages were after a hotel night where Cabral is saying, "Good morning, love. How are you feeling? We had a pretty intense night. That was the roughest sex we ever had." And then Jane is responding, "Ha, ha, 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 ha," bunch of emojis. That was one for the books. And then Jane also responded, "Send me something." And then the defense was kind of getting into the length of these hotel nights, where one of the longest hotel nights that she had done was 3 days, which is a long period of time. And then under direct, when AUSA Maureen Comey was doing her direct examination of Jane, Jane was explaining that New Year's Eve of 2022, that Diddy came to Jane's hotel and that 3 men were there that night, and that she seemed okay with doing these types of nights. But as far as Jane's kind of role in setting up these hotel nights, the jury did see other text exhibits between Jane and Cabral, where Cabral is saying, "Hey, I'll be in LA on the 12th of February. And Jane is saying, "Hey, babe, happy Friday. Are you up? How are you? It's my birthday weekend and you didn't show me love. I haven't forgotten that your LA dates are coming up. Make me a personal video just for me." And then Cabral responds to these text messages. And so then the jury also saw more text exhibits, kind of going fast forward a little bit in time, April 4th of 2022, between Jane and Sean Combs, where Diddy is saying, "I've been having crazy fantasies about you and Leo being the Italian person that Jane references. He's actually one of the entertainers, but she calls him the Italian." And then Jane is saying, "I'll figure out what time I can make it out there. Baby, I want to make love to you. I haven't had you to myself. It's been 5 months. I'm fine with the other stuff." And Diddy is saying that he's aroused. "What have you been thinking about? See if the Italian is free after we spend time together. Tomorrow is bad. How about this weekend?" And it seemed like Jane, even for the next hotel night, which occurred 10 days later after these text messages that I just read, but the defense was kind of pointing out that after these specific hotel nights in April of 2022, that Jane and Diddy didn't have hotel nights for about 2 months, whereas under direct, it seemed like Jane was testifying that pretty much every time she saw Diddy, that she was doing these hotel nights. But the defense was really kind of saying, well, there were long periods of times where you weren't doing these hotel nights. It could either be weeks on end, it could be months on end, or there were just times where you and Diddy were just hanging out together and being together and in each other's arms, but you guys weren't always doing these hotel nights. And so then more text exhibits were shown to the jury, this being in June 19th of 2022, where Jane is saying, "I'm having a vibe." Diddy says, "Well, what are you in the mood for?" And Jane is saying, "A good time." And then Diddy saying, "You planned something for me." Jane said, "I know what you want, but I'm not in the mood. I don't want to make you mad." And then Diddy responds, "All good. Surprise me with a freak-off role play." And so I think the defense also pointing out here that they didn't do a hotel night, even though it was kind of insinuated in these particular messages. But what they ended up doing was having a movie night, and that was a night where they weren't watching movies, a good movie from a movie theater or anything like that, but they were watching movies that would either be pornography or movies that they filmed together during these hotel nights. And so the defense really kind of, I think, poked a lot of holes as far as Jane saying under direct that every time she always did these hotel nights, every single time she saw Sean Combs or saw Diddy. But under the defense's cross-examination, they were really like, okay, it doesn't seem like that was always the case.
Yeah, and the idea, right, that he didn't always force or demand her to engage in this, but she was a partner in it. And I remember there was a message today, and correct me if I'm wrong, where she had messaged him, "Not really in the mood for that part, don't want to make you mad." And he allegedly responds, "All good." And then there's messages where she expresses her love for him. Like, "I love you so much as my friend, my lover, my boyfriend, even though you don't like that word." Weren't they really trying to show today, through her messages and his messages, that he wasn't always forcing her or asking her opinion about this and trying to show the love that they had between each other, right? That was a big theme, the softer side of Sean Combs, right?
Yeah, the very soft side from what we see. Like, there are times, honestly, Jesse, where the messages are being read aloud, and it seems like they're sometimes, and I kind of hate to put it this way, like they're two high school kids in love. Like, you really, at times, I felt kind of conflicted as far as just hearing these, because there's the aspects of Jane's testimony under direct, right? But then there's aspects of the cross examination where the defense was kind of like, okay, the government didn't show you every single thing between their relationship, and there were just kind of a lot of things. And so Jane, throughout her testimony, even under direct, even under cross-examination, she really kind of expresses very often how much she loves pleasing her partner, her romantic partner, her lover, and that being Sean Combs around the time. And so we're hearing more text exhibits, July 22nd of 2022, where Jane is saying, "Good morning, baby. I had such a great time with you." Diddy's saying, "Want to do dinner at 9, pack a freak bag just in case." But then the defense pointed out to Jane, okay, well, just because he made you pack a freak bag doesn't mean you guys always did hotel nights, right? And Jane was like, yeah, that is true, and that she would normally just pack these freak night bags or these freak bags, and she would put lingerie and high heels and just things that he likes inside these particular bags. And so then we're hearing more text exhibits around that same time frame, summer of 2022. So this was July 27th of 2022, where Diddy's saying, "What do you want to do?" And Jane is saying, "Well, what do you want to do, baby?" And then just that, "Are you aroused for me?" And Diddy's like, "Okay, well, can you? I'm going to work out with Paul and then meet up with you." And then Jane is saying, "Do you want my hair up?" And Diddy's saying, "Okay, what time are we ready?" So as far as the really lovey-dovey messages, those were also shown a lot today, where there was an exhibit shown to the jury where it was text messages from Jane to Diddy after a hotel night, and it was kind of interesting, Jesse, because these are really kind of lovey-dovey messages that are being read out loud to the jury. However, at this particular part, Jane is getting kind of emotional on the stand, and I kind of even wrote in my notes, I wasn't sure why, because as you're hearing these particular messages being read, it's things like, "I love you so much, baby. You're the reason my child smiles. I love you. No other man has treated me this way." Then there's more messages from Jane again, and the defense is pointing out these were after hotel nights, where Jane is saying, "I love you, baby. Can't wait to see your interview tomorrow," and that Diddy just makes her smile. And Jane wrote, "Just wanted to make you smile, spending time in the sunshine." Diddy is writing in messages, "Okay, movie night was off the chain," and Jane is responding, "Loving that, delicious." And just more messages where you could really see just the love between the two. There was one particular video that was actually shown to the jury. Unfortunately, we weren't able to see it, but you could really hear Diddy and Jane kind of in a moment of togetherness, not like that way, but togetherness as far as being together just as two people would in just any other relationship. And so this was a video again shown to the jury where Jane was explaining around this particular time frame. She was really feeling depressed around this, but then you see this video and Diddy is saying, "Oh, I love this right here." They sounded so in love. Jane is heard laughing a lot in this particular video, and Diddy is saying, "I was in a dark hole. You had to save me. You had to pick me up. I love you." And then Jane is saying, "I love you too, baby. You did saving on me." And so the defense was saying that around this time frame where Jane is saying that she was really depressed around this time because she was doing all these hotel nights, not with just one man, but with multiple men, and that she was super depressed, that she and Diddy were spending time together, that they were both depressed together. But in this video, you can hear just kind of love and laughter. But according to Jane, because again, she was getting kind of emotional at points, especially during the latter part of court today, where I was kind of wondering why particularly she was getting a little emotional, as it just seemed pretty innocent, pretty innocent just hearing these texts.
Let me ask you this. It seemed to me, based on reading the reporting, she was doubling down on the stand, and correct me if I'm wrong, doubling down on the stand that she was pressured into this, that it might look like she was all on board with this, but that she felt pressured to do this. And I don't know what that back and forth looked like between her and Tenny Garagos, but would I be wrong that is a common theme, a common response she came back with today?
Yeah, it seemed like she really was kind of doubling down as far as why she was doing these hotel nights, because she wanted to please her partner, but also that she, and that same breath, kind of was saying that she was just very uncomfortable with it. But I think the defense was also kind of like, okay, are you saying that you're uncomfortable with these hotel nights because you have regret or resentment now? But it seemed like from these messages, and it seemed like from what we were hearing about in these exhibits, that around the time frame where this was occurring, so between 2021 to 2024, and we haven't even really got into 2024 for just yet, that Jane was totally fine and that the only things that would make her apprehensive about these hotel nights, according to the defense, was that Diddy and other women were being seen together publicly. So they brought up other women, including a name that we've heard a lot during testimony, going all the way back to Cassie, that being Gina, another example being Young Miami. And then it wasn't even just those two, it was other women too, where Jane would spot photos of him with a woman in London and would get upset, and the defense is kind of like, okay, well, is this why you were saying that you didn't want to do a hotel night? Is this why that you were saying you were uncomfortable, as opposed to a couple weeks or months ago where you were planning to do these nights, the sobriety party or the all-star party and those types of things? And so it seemed like a little back and forth where I think Jane at points was kind of getting a little short with her answers, as far as just being like, trying to over-explain her text messages and why she particularly sent those types of text messages, because it was either to please her partner or because she was reading in between the lines of what Diddy really wanted. Right. And then she would get a little short with Teni Garagos at some points today, but she held it together as best as she could. But again, going back to some of those points where she was a little emotional on the stand too. So it was a little bit of both today.
Yeah, it's a question, did she have a lack of choice? Was there a lack of consent? The defense is really keen to say it wasn't that she was opposed to these nights because she's a victim of sex trafficking and she can't get out. It's that she didn't want to do it if he's cheating on her, right? Or there's another woman on the side, or she's not being treated the same way. That's a very different scenario than the sex trafficker victim scenario. And these messages, this video, this testimony may complicate that for the prosecution. Talking about evidence too, I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, was she shown certain exhibits? I don't know if they were pictures, I don't know if they were videos from the hotel nights.
So yeah, she was shown photos before these hotel nights occurred where Diddy and Jane would be on date nights, for example. So the jury was able to see photos from 2023 when Jane was celebrating her birthday with Diddy and they were in a hotel room. And the defense was pointing out here that Diddy's personal photographer came out and did this photo shoot for Jane and Diddy for her birthday. And then Jane was like, well, his butler came with an iPhone. And then Teni Garagos is kind of like, but his personal photographer also came to the hotel room that night. And Jane is saying, yes, I do remember that. And then Jane was kind of, another point, Jesse, where Jane was kind of a little bit trying to over-explain her answers at times, where she would be asked a question and then she would really get defensive at points, saying she was just adapting to her environment and she did plan these hotel nights, just kind of blurting that part out a little bit at times, especially when it came to the 2023 birthday, which seemed like a very big kind of point of contention as far as she is concerned, where it seemed like from one aspect she was really enjoying this particular birthday, but then from another aspect it seemed like she wasn't enjoying this particular birthday. So this was, the jury was shown February 3rd, 2023 text messages where Jane is asking Diddy, hey, can you send me something? And that something being money for her birthday, because she wanted an outfit. She wanted to cover the expenses of this birthday party that she wanted to do with her friends over in Los Angeles and later fly over to Miami to spend time with Diddy. But she asked Diddy for $15,000 just for a 13 to 14 person dinner, which, you know, according to here in New York, that might be a little bit of chump change, but I mean, that is really expensive for just 13 to 14 people. And then the jury also saw text exhibits where Jane was in Miami after this particular birthday, where Jane is saying, baby, is Nobu the only option for dinner? Can we try poppy steak or can we try carbone? And Jane was saying that she was trying to get out of these hotels, and the hotel being Hotel Nobu, which is a very fancy hotel, and Nobu is a very fancy and expensive restaurant that I've always wanted to go to. But anyway, Jane was saying that she wanted Diddy to read between the lines, and again, kind of blurring the lines here as far as just these insinuations versus what was actually said. And so Jane was seeming really upset that Diddy didn't take her to poppy steak or carbone. And this is another point where she was getting kind of short with her answers with Teni Garagos, where Teni would ask, oh, have you been over there, or how was it? And then Jane was like, well, I wouldn't know. And so then there were other points where the jury saw exhibit photos from that particular birthday of Jane and Diddy together. Jane was wearing a necklace and a bracelet from Van Cleef, which is a very high-end jewelry store, and she was explaining that that was beautiful. And then Teni Garagos was like, okay, well, were you excited to get this present? Were you excited to get your present for your birthday? You're smiling in that photo. And Jane was like, well, I was excited about the affection. I was happy to be in my lover's arms. And Tenny Garagos was like, well, you like to give your partner what he liked. And Jane was like, unfortunately, yes. And Jane also mentioned that when she was taking these particular photos that she had already taken an ecstasy pill and that she was waiting for an escort around this time. And so the jury was shown more text exhibits between Jane and Cabral, this being after the birthday, this being in April of 2023, where Jane is saying, hey, hope all is well. Do you have plans tomorrow? Would you be free to travel to Miami? And Cabral says, yes, love, I'm free. Jane is saying, I'll book your travel. And then Jane was saying that was another instance where she was took another ecstasy pill, because the defense was really pointing out, do you have plans tomorrow? Because they were talking about her coming down from drugs and how she would kind of be defensive about taking these particular drugs and then sending these messages while on drugs. But Tenny Garagos is like, but you're talking about plans for tomorrow where you're probably going to be off of the drugs, or the drugs will be kind of out of your system by that point. And then Jane is kind of like, well, I would constantly take a bunch of different pills. And then the jury saw text messages from Jane to Diddy, and this being the post-birthday, so going back a little bit in time, that Jane is saying, just wanted to say I love and appreciate everything you did for my birthday. And again, this was after Jane was saying under direct that she didn't enjoy this particular birthday because she had to do a hotel night with not just one man, but with multiple men. But then the defense during their cross-examination showed this text message where Jane is showing her appreciation for everything Diddy did for her birthday. And Jane was saying, I appreciated the flowers. I appreciated our lovemaking in regards to him, that being Diddy. She said she was appreciating the little things that he did as opposed to doing these hotel nights. So it was a little back and forth, and so it could be pretty confusing to the jury as far as what they heard under direct versus what they're hearing under cross, where I feel like the defense kind of made the argument here while Tenny Garagos has been cross-examining Jane that there is kind of more to this story as opposed to what was just testified to under direct.
You know, it's interesting because I went into this thinking they weren't going to be aggressive in their cross-examination. I didn't think that they were going to be suggesting to the jury that she's lying, that she's not telling the truth, the same way that they were aggressive with Brianna Bongolan or Mia. I thought that they were going to go out at it basically saying, we're going to accept everything is true. We're going to accept that all of these hotel nights played out, as you said, all of these text messages played out, as they said, but it's more of just a perhaps toxic relationship as opposed to a sex trafficker and a victim, right? And really put the focus on the prosecution and saying the prosecutors are at fault for calling you. The prosecutors are transforming your testimony into a federal crime. But it does seem to me a little bit, that at least today, they're trying to say she might not be telling the whole truth about what's going on. Did you get that sense today?
I don't know if I got the sense that she wasn't telling the entire truth, but I could tell that she might be conflicted as far as just her overall thoughts just on having to do these hotel nights for the duration of their relationship. Because even going back to some of the jealousy points where she would talk about Gina or she would talk about Young Miami, it seemed like she was kind of fine doing the hotel nights until she saw that these other women didn't have to do these hotel nights. And these were other women that Diddy kind of flaunted, never told them that they had to take down photos of him with these other women on social media, whereas Jane was told to take these photos off social media. And it seems like the defense was kind of pointing out too that she would get upset and send these particular messages where she was saying that she didn't want to be doing these hotel nights after she would get upset seeing that Diddy was either with another woman, taking a woman to Turks and Caicos, or even just bragging on a podcast, and that being the Carisha Please podcast. I think it was one of Carisha, aka Young Miami's, one of her very first podcast episodes. Diddy was the guest on there, and they were really talking about just their sexual relationship together, whereas Diddy had told Jane specifically that he wasn't sleeping with Young Miami at this point. Then Jane found out through this podcast that he was, and so there were times where I didn't know if she was necessarily lying or kind of exaggerating the truth, as more so as that I felt kind of conflicted whether or not this was jealousy or whether or not she was non-consensual to these hotel nights. So if I'm feeling a little conflicted, I can only imagine how the jury is feeling kind of being in this and really kind of listening to all of this too.
By the way, what were they doing? Were they following her testimony word for word? Where you mentioned sometimes there's a tennis match, they look back and forth between the prosecutor and Jane, or just in general, the look between the witness and the attorney. What could you tell from the jurors? Because you know, it's interesting. We had a question, we had a poll up on Law and Crime's YouTube page today about whether or not the jurors are still engaged after so many days of testimony of Jane. And I'm curious, from your perspective, do they still seem to be paying attention and engaged with this cross-examination and what Jane is testifying to?
Yeah, they seem pretty engaged, especially when they're shown these text exhibits. They're all looking really intently in their screen. But what I have also noticed, Jesse, is sometimes when we have kind of those longer days, sometimes when we're spilling past 3 p.m. Eastern time up until 5 p.m., I do catch the jurors looking at the clock here and there. And I think even when the judge today was like, okay, we're going to dismiss you guys just a little bit early, I did see some of the jurors smiling and they're like, yes, finally. And something that I think that they were also feeling just the days prior to, because, you know, as much as we love watching trials day in and day out, it can be a lot for a person to listen to all of this for an entire day, even though today was a little bit short. And I will say that it seems like they love the days where we do get out early. So from what I can see, they do feel engaged, or they do seem engaged, but also I think they're just like us and regular people, where they kind of want to get out a little bit early, still have the day to themselves and not have to listen to this really graphic and explicit testimony for hours on end.
Yeah, not a shocker that the jurors want to get out of there. I mean, this is such a long trial and so much information. Sitting in that, you know, that jury box day in, day out, listening to testimony, videos, text messages, voice notes, it is not easy. Now, one of the things I understand the jury also heard about was what Jane may have purchased for the hotel nights. I mean, the same kind of testimony came up with Cassie, right? Was she buying things for the freak-offs, again, to show she was a willing participant, she was a part of it? What did she buy? What did Jane buy?
Yeah, well, Jane admitted on the stand today that she was totally fine picking up what was needed for these hotel rooms. So she said that she would go to sex stores or sex shops and she would purchase lube. She would purchase shorts for these escorts to wear because, and surprisingly, that they would be matching the same ones that Diddy would wear too. And so she said she would even buy heels, and she would buy male erection pills because she said, in her defense of this, she said that she wanted to cut the time with the entertainers so that they would be erect already, so that way she's saving time kind of doing the initial stuff, and that they could pretty much get right to it, so that way it's quicker, so that way it could be over. And then the defense, Tenny Garagos, while cross-examining her, was like, okay, well, why are you fine giving them erection pills, but you're saying one of your requirements for these entertainers or escorts was that they couldn't use drugs? And then Jane is like, well, because I figured what was in the store was safer than them doing drugs. And just that Jane loves pleasing her partner, something that she has said a couple of times while on the stand. And then there were times too where there was one particular hotel night that I believe it was around Diddy's birthday, or it might have been Valentine's Day. It was just a kind of one of those celebratory events that was happening, where Jane set up the hotel room, or she set up the hotel night, I should say, where she had balloons and she had candles and she had roses everywhere. And so I feel like the defense at this point is kind of like, okay, well, you're purchasing all these particular items in order to do these hotel nights, and you're fine picking up these items. There was a text message that was shown to the jury where Jane texted Diddy being like, okay, do you want me to pick this up? Do you want to pick this up? That way we can cut down on time. And so there were a lot of points within the cross-examination when they were like, okay, well, you were purchasing the items that were needed, and it seemed like you were fine picking up the items that were needed to do these hotel nights, including the lube and the shorts and the heels, and then the pills that followed too.
Look, on one hand, you could say choice negates the criminal charge, right? Her having an element of agency and choice means she's not a victim of sex trafficking. But it's also complicated because you go back to the testimony of Dr. Dawn Hughes, who said that in relationships like this, there's a reason victims may stay with their abusers. There's a reason they may comply. There's a reason they may continue to have events with them. And they may behave in ways that appear inconsistent with being abused, but it's not always the case. I understand there was also a lot of conversation regarding this trip to Turks and Caicos in what, 2023? What was that about?
Yeah, so this particular trip to Turks and Caicos was actually something that Jane has been wanting for years, because she has said a lot of times during her testimony that one of the biggest things that she loves about Diddy is just that first trip that they had taken together, that being to Turks and Caicos. But even before that, after her birthday in 2023, which is around the February timeframe, that she was upset with Diddy for taking another woman to Turks and Caicos, the place that she had wanted to go to for a while. And that woman that Diddy ended up taking to Turks and Caicos was Carisha, aka Young Miami. And then Jane was like, well, when I was made to have sex with 3 guys on my birthday, it was hard and it was hurtful in that sense, as far as why she was just so upset as why Diddy was taking Young Miami to Turks and Caicos. And so after Jane saw that Diddy took Young Miami onto this Turks and Caicos trip, Jane expressed that she was very heartbroken about this, and she stopped talking to Diddy for a while, for about more than a week. And then the jury is shown text exhibits where Diddy and Jane are breaking up for a little off period, and Jane was upset because, again, Diddy took another woman onto a trip, and that Diddy also threatened to break up with her, but they ended up getting back together because she missed him so much. And so the jury is shown text exhibits from March 2nd of 2023 where Diddy is kind of ending the relationship, saying that I think I hate that I'm breaking up my friendship, which is surprising because from Jane's perspective, they were in a relationship, but that they were ending the friendship over a lie. But then a week later, Diddy is saying good morning, and Jane is responding just a few minutes later, good morning. And then Diddy is like, okay, let's schedule a call together. Let's talk about it so that way we could plan something together. At first, Diddy suggested a hotel night, and then Jane responded, a hotel night, that's the best you can do. And then Diddy responds, well, Turks, being Turks and Caicos. And then Jane likes that particular message. And, you know, again, Diddy's a very rich man, and so he had a very expensive budget for this trip, that being $100,000. I believe under the cross-examination today, Tenny Garagos revealed he probably spent half on that trip, but still a year's worth of pay, not mine, but a year's worth of pay for some people just for one trip. It's a lot of money to go there. And so the jury was shown more photos of Jane that she took of Diddy while they were in Turks together. And Jane is saying, you know, I thought he looked cute in this photo, even though he was annoyed at me. And she said that they were bickering that night in the particular photos that were shown to the jury. But Jane ended up framing these photos and giving them to Diddy for him to put in his home. And so Jane had said under direct that she wouldn't have gone to Turks and Caicos if she knew that escorts were going to be there. But the defense was saying that she reached out to some of the escorts while on that trip to Turks and Caicos. And then that's kind of, if you remember back to her direct examination, where she was explaining during one particular hotel night in Turks and Caicos that she got upset with Diddy, that they were having an argument, and that she threw a diamond bracelet. And then Tenny Garagos was like, well, didn't you want diamonds? And Jane was saying, well, I wanted Sean. And then the defense pointed to text messages that she wrote where she expressed that she wanted diamonds. But under direct, she said that she threw the diamond bracelet after a fight during the hotel, but that even after this particular trip, that Jane ended up inviting Cabral over to Miami, and that's after Jane and Diddy came up with this love contract. And then the jury has shown more text messages from March of 2023 where Jane is saying beyond sex, it was passion. It was a combination of passion and freaky stuff. I love our sex so much. And then the defense also pointing out that 2 weeks after the hotel nights in Turks and Caicos, even the hotel nights coming back from Turks and Caicos, that for about a 2-week period, or that when Jane saw Diddy 2 weeks later, that there was no hotel nights. But then the jury was shown more text messages where Jane was reaching out to other entertainers and Paul, and then just other things too. So it seemed like, from, again, Jane's perspective, she said that she didn't want to go on this particular trip knowing that escorts were going to be there, knowing that she would have to do hotel nights. But then the defense is kind of pointing out, well, weren't you kind of saying that you were fine with these entertainers to come to the this particular trip, and that you were asking for other items too, such as diamonds, and that it wasn't just, oh, these are diamonds, like whatever, I wanted to be with Sean. But the defense is like, no, you were kind of saying here that you wanted diamonds too. And so there's a lot of stuff going on at this testimony.
Yeah. No, look, the idea of, was she being paid? Look, there's one, the prosecution would say, if he's holding financial control over her, paying for things, paying for her rent, controlling her career, you know, like they said with Cassie, that can be a form of coercion to induce her, to pressure her into these sex acts with male commercial sex workers. Or it could be, you know, she's getting something of benefit and it's like a relationship, and she's getting gifts and getting paid herself to do it, and that might be quite different. Talking about trips, there was also, a trip to New York in that same year that's very important to the story as well, right?
Yeah, so this trip happened in September of 2023, so months after the Turks and Caicos trip. And around this time frame, which if you think about it in context, it's 2 months before Cassie had filed her lawsuit. But Diddy was here in New York because he was promoting his Love album, Off the Grid. And this is kind of where the text messages, as far as where Jane is expressing to Sean Combs that she felt like she was opening Pandora's box. And this was something that she just couldn't close. And Diddy's responding, "Girl, stop." But the defense was kind of like, okay, there's a little more context to this, where Diddy was telling Jane that he missed her, and that Jane was saying, okay, I overreacted, we'll be good when we're together. And during this particular trip, again, the jury has shown more text exhibits between Jane and Diddy, where Jane is liking a message after Diddy sent her a link for Cowboys for Angels. The defense brings up that Jane wanted to go to this members only club, that Diddy was there for the album release party, and that Diddy didn't have time to go to dinner because of this particular album release party. And so they ended up going to a lounge at a hotel, and Jane was saying under direct that Diddy was being defensive because she wanted to stop doing these hotel nights. But then they ended up meeting with an entertainer on this particular night, but this was the same entertainer that Jane wasn't attracted to, and so they released him. They let him pretty much go from this hotel night, but they still ended up paying this entertainer. And I was thinking to myself, why is the defense just coming out and being so blatant that these entertainers specifically were paid for, even if their services in a way weren't used? But there might be a reason to that. But even afterwards, Jane was saying that even though they dismissed this particular escort that she didn't find necessarily attractive, that they ended up finding someone else, and that being the escort named Cabral. And Jane told the government that she felt freer. She was high on drugs and loose because of the drugs likely being, or presumably being, ecstasy, because she said that was the one that she took the most. And that under direct, Jane said it was Cabral who I knew and Diddy who I was in love with, as far as why she felt possibly comfortable doing this particular hotel night, even though she had sent messages saying that she felt like she opened Pandora's box and she couldn't close this. And so even after this particular New York trip, again, the Pandora box text message that was shown to the jury again, that Jane ended up flying to Miami after this trip, and that she and Diddy would watch their videos together at a dinner, and that they ended up even flying Cabral out not only to New York, but when she got to Miami after the New York trip, they flew Cabral, who I believe lives in Atlanta, flew Cabral out from Atlanta to Miami after this particular trip too.
You know what that sounds like to me? And I don't know how much the defense is trying to run away from it. Transportation to engage in prostitution. I mean, if you're just talking about transporting sex workers for sex work, and she's allegedly a part of it, going to all different places and performing these hotel nights in all different places with the sex workers, that feels like a clear-cut case of transportation to engage in prostitution. Sex trafficking may be more complicated, but don't forget, that's a charge that carries up to 10 years in prison. Now, we talk so much about the hotel nights happening in hotels, and you would think for racketeering, the more that the prosecution could talk about the assistants were setting up the rooms, the assistants were paying for the travel of her or sex workers. That's how you get to racketeering. Right? This idea of a criminal enterprise, an association of people committing crimes and facilitating them and covering them up. But the hotel nights then went to Airbnbs?
Yep, they moved to Airbnbs. They would be at Jane's residence at some points. But as far as just the Airbnbs, Jane said that she wanted to move these hotel nights because she wanted to get out of hotels to do Airbnbs. And so there was one particular exhibit that was shown to the jury about text messages where Jane is talking about how she planned on renting an Airbnb for $2,500 a night, and that Diddy was worried about this Airbnb, whether or not cameras were going to be there and whether they would be present, and probably because, again, he's a high profile person, that he was probably a little apprehensive that something might be caught on camera. And so he seemed apprehensive by the texts that were read about cameras being in this particular Airbnb. And so Jane was implying that, okay, well, maybe Diddy's security could do an entire sweep of this Airbnb, or maybe they could cover the cameras. But I think as far as the government's point of the case, yeah, they were saying that, okay, all the assistants helped plan out these hotel nights and that the assistants would set it up. But from these messages that were read to the jury, it didn't seem like it was always the assistants. And and that even Jane would go the extra step as far as either planning them at her residence that she could host them, or that she could go out of her way and find an Airbnb for $2,500 a night and invite the entertainers as well as Sean Combs over to those too. And so it seemed like it kind of varied as far as hotel nights not being just in hotels, but in other places too that weren't always set up just by Diddy's staff and assistants.
And again, her taking or allegedly taking a proactive role in this complicates her alleged role as a victim in a sex trafficking case. You mentioned something called a sobriety party, or at least read a sobriety party. What was that?
So the sobriety party kind of came about after Jane was expressing that she wanted Diddy to go to rehab. But even just before that, around this time period, it was October of 2023, and Jane saw photos of Diddy and Gina together in Los Angeles. So the jury has shown more text exhibits. Again, a lot of text messages were shown in court today to the jury. Unfortunately, again, we couldn't see them. But Jane is saying, you don't need me, you're with who you want. And Diddy is saying, I need you. And Jane is saying, well, you partied with Gina at the Edition, and you brought the messy stuff back in. I want to protect my peace. You bring the bull stuff back in. That energy goes on you, or that bad energy goes on you and comes on to me. Diddy is saying, girl, stop. You know, I don't feed into this. You're the only one who puts me at peace. And that at peace, the defense was kind of like, okay, well, you were the one that put him at peace with these hotel nights, that he liked these hotel nights, and that you were fine doing these hotel nights because, again, you wanted to please your partner, please your boyfriend. And then Jane says that she encouraged Diddy around this time period to go to rehab. She says that she wanted him to get healthy, to eat better foods, and to meditate, to do yoga, to kind of have a quality of life, I guess, similar to her, where she says that she kind of does these things where she eats well, she works out, she just wants to live a healthier lifestyle. And so Diddy said that he would do it for 30 days, but before going sober for a 30-day period, he said that he wanted one last hotel night, and that hotel night being sober, and that hotel night not being sober with one entertainer or escort, but with 3 men. And that's when Jane was saying that she admitted and agreed to do it, and that Jane was saying, and this is where they were getting to the resentment versus regret, and whether or not she's just feeling resentment or regret about doing these with the amount of men just now, or was she feeling this way when she was saying yes to it back in 2023? But Jane was saying that she does resent Diddy, that she resents him for all of it. And she said this after the defense saying again that she only kind of regrets it now. And so another point where the defense was kind of pointing out that Jane was totally fine doing it, and maybe she's feeling conflicted in her feelings now in 2025, but wasn't feeling conflicted in her feelings in doing this back in 2023, whether she was either on drugs or whether she was sober.
By the way, I interviewed Mauricio Padilla today regarding another Sidebar episode. It was about all the text messages that we've heard in this case, and he had such a good point. I want to credit him for it. He goes, Jane could be a victim, but not a victim of a crime. She could be a victim of a toxic relationship and being manipulated and being deceived and being used by Sean Combs, a victim of, a toxic relationship. But she might not necessarily be a victim of sex trafficking. And I just want to keep that in mind as we're listening to this and talking about what is complicated testimony. To wrap things up with Jane's testimony, and again, I know she's going to be continued to be questioned on the stand. It hasn't wrapped up yet. There was a talk about Cassie's lawsuit. So it came up during the course already where she had basically had texted Sean Combs that when Cassie filed her lawsuit in November of 2023, she's reading the pages and she basically said, this is what I've been going through. It's almost like she discovered her own, which I think she said was trauma. What happened today? What was she questioned about Cassie's lawsuit?
Yeah, so that happened kind of towards the end of court today, where the defense was kind of like, well, Cassie's lawsuit came out, but you and Diddy weren't even together around this time period, that you and Diddy broke up a few weeks earlier because Diddy was with another woman in London and not with you. And so the defense asked Jane, did Mr. Combs talk to you about Cassie, and that Cassie was one of his greatest loves? And Jane responded yes, and that Gina tormented that relationship, which is kind of an interesting point for the defense to bring up, because that was something that Cassie said, that was something that Carrie said. I think even at points that's something that Mia and Deontay even said about Gina too, and just that they that she had allegedly torpedoed Cassie and Diddy's relationship, but I also think it's interesting that Diddy was seeing Gina in different aspects up until 2023. So there's kind of a little both with that, but that Jane was explaining under cross about Cassie's lawsuit that she was following the lawsuit pretty closely on social media, and then there was a sidebar, and then the jury was dismissed for the end of the day. So I think where the defense might pick up tomorrow is kind of like, okay, well, you say you were traumatized and you were triggered by Cassie's lawsuit, but you still did hotel nights even after you two got back together, and you continued to do these hotel nights up until the time period where then he was arrested. I think her last one was August of 2024, and so they ended for the day as far as really kind of teasing up Cassie's lawsuit. So I assume once we get back to court tomorrow, that's where they'll pick up, and then we'll really kind of get into what happened between November of 2023 up until September of 2024 when Diddy was ultimately arrested.
Yeah, and I know that their relationship ended just before his arrest. Okay, Elizabeth, before we wrap things up, we kind of got a sense of who the prosecution is going to call next, also maybe who they're not going to call, and when they plan to wrap up their case. Talk to us about it.
Yeah, so a lot of the big questions are, when is the prosecution going to rest? When are we going to see the defense's case? But according to the prosecution, they're like, okay, the earliest that we could possibly rest is Wednesday of next week, and the latest we could rest is by Friday of next week. So that's really pretty soon. And so I was thinking, okay, there has to be a few more people that we're going to hear from. I was thinking maybe we would hear from Damian Butler, one of the security guards, or maybe Christina Coram, but those names weren't the ones that we heard about today when the prosecution was talking about the next few witnesses that they plan to call. But some of those witnesses included Andre Lamont, a person named Jonathan. Not sure if that's the exact same Jonathan that Jane referenced in her testimony as being one of Diddy's assistants. And then Anaya Sanker. And as far as Anaya Sanker's role in her testimony for the government, we do know that she's going to be one of the first summary witnesses, kind of to sum up just the different charts that they have. It's probably in relation to transportation to engage in prostitution, probably just other summary exhibits to show to the jury to kind of piece all those puzzle pieces together and really kind of show them. And so that's what we know now. And then the defense case will happen. And the defense was saying, okay, depending on who the prosecution is cutting from their witness list, then we'll see kind of where our witness list is kind of looking like and how long that duration is happening. But the defense and even the government seem pretty positive and optimistic that the case will still wrap at least by July 4th. And so they seem from both sides that they're on track to end at the same time period that they planned on ending from the start of the trial.
Yeah, I wonder if the summary witness is somebody who could, like you said, if there's just a voluminous amount of material to try to give a summation about what it all means for the jury instead of having to go through it individually. I got to say, if they don't call Christina Coram, who's been mentioned, I think, almost every day by almost every witness, this former chief of staff, who, I mean, we were speculating, should she be the final witness for the prosecution to tie in so many things, to really support the racketeering charge, to support the idea that everybody was on a common page, everybody had a common purpose, everybody knew what was going on, that connective tissue. You know, if they don't call her, maybe she didn't agree to some sort of deal. You know, you imagine maybe she would have been offered immunity like others. I can't answer. Or maybe they don't think she's a valuable witness. I got to say I'm surprised considering how much she was a part of the case. Or she was on the witness list, but they said, you know what, we don't need her at this point. We don't need her at this point. We think we've proven the case. Things can always change in a trial. We shall see. So, Elizabeth Millner, before I let you go, we got a question during the lunchtime show that I have to ask you. It's from Sea Smooth Skater. What did Elizabeth do to celebrate her birthday after she got off work?
Oh my goodness. Well, that is a fun question. I love that. Well, I ordered sushi and I watched reality television up until I fell asleep with some chocolate cake that ended up falling on the floor. But that's okay. That's okay. I had a great birthday celebration and then back at it again.
Good for you. And it was a late start to court today, so you got to sleep in a little bit. I appreciate it.
Yes.
Well, happy birthday again.
Yeah.
Elizabeth Millner, great reporting. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jesse.
And that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you should get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.